The American Revolution was a rebellion initiated by the 13 colonies against England, largely over the colonies' lack of representation in the British Parliament. This was further aggravated by England imposing taxes on the colonies in an effort to pay off the huge debt the British government stacked up fighting and winning the 7 Years' War. The colonies had enjoyed a large degree of autonomy until now, and the increasing interference by the British Parliament angered the colonists and they began demanding a seat in the Parliament. England justified their actions by stating that the 7 Years' War had been fought largely to protect the colonists from the French, and thus the colonists should pay a portion of the debt in repayment. In terms of the seat in Parliament, England claimed the colonists were virtually represented and denied the petition to grant the colonists a seat in Parliament. The colonists were not opposed to paying taxes. They had been paying taxes to their local legislatures for decades, but chafed at paying taxes to a governing body that the colonists had no representation in. Repeatedly denied and forced to pay taxes that the colonists had no legal way of countering, the anger began turning to violence in the colonies. In protest over a tax on tea, thousands of dollars worth of tea was seized and dumped into the Boston harbor, which prompted the British to occupy Boston with regular troops and close several ports, as well as suspend colonial legislations in the colonies to punish the colonists in 1773. By 1775, violence and tensions in the colonies had increased dramatically, with several buildings being burned and looted as well as several shootings. The tension finally broke out into open war when British troops exchanged fire with colonial militia at Concord in April. No one knows who fired first, but the result was the last bonds holding the colonies to England had snapped, and any chance to a peaceful solution was now gone. The British were forced to conduct a fighting retreat and suffered heavy casualties before making it back to the safety of Boston. American militia then moved to surround Boston and pin the British force in the city. In June of 1775, a major battle broke out in the hills overlooking Charleston that gave a commanding position and potentially blocking the harbor, which was the British garrison's lifeline. The British managed to drive the colonials off the heights, but at a very steep cost, leading many colonists to believe it was a Patriot victory despite it being a strategic defeat. This British victory is quickly reversed when the colonists trained heavy cannon on the city that was captured from Fort Ticonderoga earlier that year, forcing the British to abandon Boston. The colonial army, now under the command of George Washington, moved the army to New York, where he anticipated the British counterattack would land. Washington's prediction proved right when British troops as well as thousands of German mercenaries called Hessians under General Howe began landing in July of 1776. Despite Washington anticipating Howe's movements, the British inflicted a series of crushing defeats on the colonial army that came very close to destroying the Continental Army and ending the rebellion right there. Washington and his army barely managed to escape and retreated beyond the Delaware River and established defenses on the opposite bank. Washington struck back on Christmas Day and defeated a large Hessian garrison at Trenton, and then won 2 more victories against British forces in the surrounding area. These 3 victories convinced France and Spain to begin supporting the colonists with weapons and supplies to fight their longtime enemy, England. However, Washington continued to suffer defeat in 1777 after losing several battles and the British capturing Philadelphia, which was the capital of the rebels. Despite the weapons and supplies being provided by France, it became clear that the rebellion would not survive without direct intervention from France, and so the colonists spent a great deal of effort trying to convince France to enter the war directly. France was hesitant to enter the war until the rebels could prove that they could defeat the British in an open battle. This was achieved when a colonial army completely destroyed an entire British army in the Battle of Saratoga in upper New York. This finally convinced France that the American rebels could win and enter the war against England in 1778, with Spain entering a year later in 1779. This dramatically changed the balance of the conflict, and England found itself in a 3-on-1 conflict and began to buckle under the pressure. The deciding moment was in 1781, where a combined colonial French force forced the surrender of an entire British army at Yorktown. In 1782, England, on the verge of bankruptcy and believing the war was unwinnable, offered peace terms, and in 1783 the war ended with the Treaty of Paris, which officially recognized American independence and formed the United States of America. England retains control of Canada, while the new United States is granted the lands west of the Appalachian Mountains and the Great Lakes. Florida is returned to Spain, while France eventually gets the Louisiana Territory back. The American Revolution not only created a new country, but significantly changed the map of North America once again and set the stage for the largest and most costly war Europe had ever seen to that point. Welcome back, Axis and Allies players. This is NATO and the CIC, and this is our American Revolution scenario. And this is with the British winning the 7 Years' War. So, if the French had won, then the Americans would be fighting the French for independence. But since the British won, you put the British victory overlay on to signify the change in North American territory. If the French had won, then you would put this overlay down. So some new things with this scenario. Unique units is introduced. So the British have a unique infantry class called the Hessians, and they were German mercenaries that England hired to fight the American rebels. So what's unique about them is they have all the same stats as regular infantry. They just don't need a factory to produce out of. So they can be placed in any British held territory that England started their turn with. There is a limit to how many they can produce. They can only produce one per turn. No technology in this one yet. The British have to attack the Americans in the Commonwealth territory to signify the battles of Lexington and Concord that started this whole thing. And this little guy right here is Benjamin Franklin. One of the things the American player needs to do is he has to spend $4 to fund Franklin's mission to France, and to start sweet talking France into joining the war. And once Franklin gets to France, it'll unlock France and Spain being able to lend lease units or money to the colonial rebels, which will be sorely needed. The other thing, Benjamin, once he gets to France, another thing he can do is he can start doing influence rolls with France. And it's a D6, and whatever the value is, will be added to the influence points. And once Benjamin has accumulated 20 points, that will bring France into the war. So it has a potential of bringing France into the war early, but if Benjamin hasn't gotten the 20 points by the time France historically entered the war, France will enter regardless. This is just a way to potentially get France to join 1, maybe 2 turns early. And Spain will join a couple turns after that. And that's about it. Everything else, rule-wise, is more or less the same. Spain doesn't get a privateer this turn. Spain has a graduated income. Spain will start at 3 IPCs, and each turn it'll roll a D6, and whatever that value is what Spain's income will increase to, up to a maximum of 32. If Spain hasn't reached 32 by the time they enter the war, they'll just automatically jump up to their wartime production of 32. And that's about it. So, this is new calendar for the American Revolution, British version. So with that, we'll get started and see if the Americans can gain their independence or if they will remain part of England. See you then. Welcome back, Axis and Allies players. This is NATO at the CIC, and got the first update for the American Revolution. So when we started this, it was the spring of 1775. It is now spring of 1776, so the American Revolution has been going on for 1 year. Because it's still very early in the war, not going to be a whole lot to report on. England moved into New England with Hessian and regular infantry, and was able to contest it, so they've dropped American production from 21 down to 14. So we very much need European aid. Otherwise England's going to overwhelm the colonists with just sheer production. Americans, they came out of Baltimore, tried to counterattack the British in the Commonwealth, and that was unsuccessful. No hits were scored on either side. England looks like it's moving troops down to India to go after those French colonies in India. Spain is consolidating its forces and building a fleet to go across the Atlantic and challenge the British. Benjamin Franklin is sitting off the French coast, so this turn he'll land in France and open up Lend-Lease to the Americans, which is sorely needed, and start making influence rolls on France to try to get it to enter the war early. France has built up a little bit of a fleet and is already in the process of sending it over to North America. France did retain New Orleans, the aftermath of the 7 Years' War. So it's looking like France is sending an army probably to New Orleans and stage an army there and do it now because France is neutral, so England can't do anything to stop it or interfere. So France is taking advantage of that and getting an army over to North America, so when it does enter, it can attack right out of the gate. And that's it so far. So we'll come back with another update when the next major event occurs. See you then. Welcome back, Axis and Allies players. This is NATO at the CIC, and this is the beginning of the spring of the 1778 turn. And, well, what happened? England got diced pretty horribly, and it resulted in the American rebels managing to push the British completely out of the colonies, for now. As you can see, England has built up quite a return force, and wherever they land, it's going to be big. France and Spain have been dumping as much money into the American cause as they can, so it's allowed America to build up a pretty decent force to weather the onslaught that's just going to be coming as soon as I start this next turn. See, America, they missed bringing France in early by 1 point. 1 point. But either way, France joins the war this turn, and France landed its army in New Orleans, so it's looking like they're probably going to move up into Louisiana and start trying to carve some of their empire back. And as you can see, Spain has landed a bunch of forces in Texas. What Spain is going to do with that, who knows? If they're going after Florida or going to support the French and they're moving to Louisiana, who knows? England has built up their forces in India to go after the French colonies there, take some money away from the French, which means less money that they can dump into the war in North America. And with France entering the war, we're going to have a pretty big naval battle right here. So we'll come back later with another update and see where the war's at. See you then. Welcome back, Axis and Allies players. This is NATO and the CIC, and we are in the spring of the 1779 turn. So France has been in this war for a year now, and they haven't done much so far. The French Navy got completely obliterated by the British Navy, and France has invaded Louisiana territory, and they've managed to take some British units out and have diverted some British resources down to Louisiana to contain them. But other than that, that's about all they've done, with the French Navy completely destroyed. France is very limited in what they can do other than just continuing to lease money to the Americans. So now French hopes of getting back in this war are dependent on Spain, who has now joined the war this turn. So Spain has now entered the war, and the American alliance now has a navy again, and so hopefully the Spanish Navy can do a lot better than the French Navy and get back and get the European powers more directly involved in this war. In the colonies, the United States invaded Canada. They attacked Quebec, and they're not doing so well up there. They are steadily losing ground while England gains strength in Quebec. The main fight is in the Commonwealth, right here, where a sizable British and American army are duking it out over the Commonwealth. England did take the first Indian or French colony in India. They took Calcutta, and now they are moving on to Madras. And so that's where the war stands at the moment. The big question is will the Spanish Navy be able to, at the least, contain the British Navy, preferably, destroy it, but we shall see. So we'll come back later with another update sometime in the future. See you then. Welcome back, Axis and Allies players. This is NATO and the CIC, and we are now in the spring of 1782. So this is an interesting period for the American Revolution because last fall, in 1781, historically the British a major British army was surrendered at Yorktown. And that more or less was the end of the war, at least for the new Americans in North America. The final treaty that ended the war and recognized American independence, what was known as the Treaty of Paris, was not signed until 1783, almost 2 years later. So what happened in those 2 years? Well, the British more or less deduced that North America, particularly the 13 colonies, were a lost cause and shifted their focus to places like the Caribbean and India, and pretty much focus their energies on making sure that they kept those much more lucrative territories and or took a couple territories from France or Spain. There was some minor fighting still in North America in those last 2 years, as the colonists in England were jockeying for a position at the negotiating table. But 1781 more or less was the end of major fighting in North America. Like I said, all the other fighting after that was relegated to minor skirmishes or in the Caribbean and India. Little known fact, the very last battle of the American Revolution was fought in India, on the other side of the planet. So what does that mean for gameplay? Well, this scenario actually has a optional ending, or alternate variable ending. You could end it right here with the kind of historical end of major fighting in North America, or you could play another 4 rounds to play out the last 2 years before the Treaty of Paris was actually signed in Paris, hence Treaty of Paris. For this purposes, we'll continue for the next 4 rounds or the next 2 years. Just see how it plays out, see if England can win back some ground. England was losing ground pretty steadily, trying to fight the United States, France, and Spain all at the same time. It had to devote a lot of its resources and money into its navy to keep the navy alive, trying to hold off Spain. What that did was it took a lot of pressure off the American colonists and allowed them to build up a pretty substantial military. But England was able to keep its navy alive. So, with France and Spain gone, England will be able to devote all of its money and resources into building an army in North America, and maybe they can snag a territory or two in the last 4 rounds. Spain was able to retake Florida, and France, with Spanish help, almost took Louisiana. They missed it by 1. England, when the turn ended, England had 1 Hessian left in Louisiana. They missed it by 1. So, unfortunately, France misses out on a point on that. I'm not entirely sure what the points were. I was going to look that up before I started this video, and I totally spaced it. But I think right now it's sitting at 5-3 in the United States' favor. I think. But I don't know for sure. But like I said, Spain was able to put enough naval pressure on England and disrupt the transport flow enough to where England couldn't reliably and effectively reinforce its armies in North America, which allowed the United States to build up with relatively little pressure. But England was able to keep its navy alive, so that means that England is not out of the count yet. It still has 4 turns, and with the United States losing its naval shield, England has 4 turns to use its naval supremacy to potentially do a lot of damage. So they'll come back for the fall of 1783 and see if England is able to turn it around. See you then. Welcome back, Axis and Allies players. This is NATO and the CIC, and we are in the fall of 1783, and the American Revolution is over. The Treaty of Paris has been signed, and there is going to be a United States in the future. Final score was 6-3 in the United States and its allies' favor. So England recognizes American independence, and well, North America changes pretty substantially again. Spain will retain Florida, and France will get Louisiana and New France back, and then America's borders will extend all the way to the Appalachians, the Great Lakes, and England pretty much gets everything north of that. And England will also retain the French colonies in India. As you can see, given time, England would be able to overwhelm the American rebels because of their much greater production, but unfortunately Parliament has lost patience, especially with England being defeated in the Commonwealth yet again. England has lost patience and decided that it would be the war is costing more than it's worth, and it'd be better just to recognize American independence and be done with it. So, kind of like I stated in the earlier last part, because of Spain fighting a pretty good naval battle in the Atlantic, kept England from being able to reinforce North America adequately, which allowed the American rebels to build up a large enough army that it can more or less repel any British attacks, and that was made possible by France leasing over half of its money every turn to the United States, so the American rebels would have the funds to build that big army. So what is coming next? Well, Western Europe and North America are going to get a bit of a break, and we are going to go to Eastern Europe for the next conflict. And that'll be a conflict between Sweden, Russia, Austria, and the Ottoman Empire. And this will, well, for this game series, it will start a recurring theme with Russia, and that is Russia's never-ending quest for a warm water port. So we'll come back with the Russo-Turkish War and also the Russo-Swedish War. Two different wars going on at the same time. It's going to be great. So we'll see you then.